Thank you, everybody, and good morning. I made it here despite two sick children at home, not with COVID, tummy bugs. But yesterday morning, I ran out of the house before it could get me in the hope that I would make it to Prague safely. I had the most blissful night's sleep last night. So good, I cannot tell my wife. I have to pretend it was horrible, the hotel room was too warm, all these things, but I slept wonderfully. So thank you, it's a pleasure to be here. As Milan said, my name is Johnny. I started life as a recruiter 25 years ago and worked in recruiting for 15 years before setting up SocialTalent with my business partner. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of organizations today, a lot of great people and leaders in trying to develop for a lot of the organizations we work with them on how to build a culture that balances productivity with a people-focused organization through how do you hire better, how do you onboard better, engage your talent, lead that talent. And our platform is used by those organizations to train all the different stakeholders in the best practices from 80 plus experts around the world, including Jose as well, in teaching those recruiters how to source talent the best. These are some of the companies that we work with on scale across the world to teach them and their teams how to hire, engage, develop, retain, and lead their talent better. And it's against this backdrop that I wanted to start with, because these are the folks I talk to, the 50 or so leaders I speak with every month or two to understand what's happening in their world and their organizations much bigger than my organization, to understand what's happening and what will happen potentially in the future. So I want to start today with a question for you all. I'm wondering if you can help me figure out what the following have in common. First of all, what's that? It's a wallet. That's a wallet. What's this? It's a lock. This is not a difficult challenge, folks. There's no trick questions here this morning. It's okay. A wallet, a lock. What's that? It's a camera. You're getting better at this. And last of all, what's that? Yeah, it's a watch. It's a Garmin, actually. It's a Garmin watch for those of you who are runners or swimmers or cyclists. What do all four of these have in common? And Jose's not allowed to put his hand up for this one. What do these four things have in common? What do you think? Wallets, locks, cameras, fitness trackers. What do they have in common? Anybody? Sir?
Replacing my phone.
Well done. All of these are being made redundant by the phone. Okay? I no longer own or use a wallet. I use a watch. Pays for everything. I haven't brought a wallet with me in 2.5 years, since the beginning of the pandemic. I have yet to replace my locks, but I'm excited about replacing my locks. My eldest, I have 4 boys, my eldest is 14. I do not want to have to get him a key because he will lose that key. 14-year-olds lose everything, for those of you who have teenagers in the house. But these days, locks are being replaced by smart locks that opens with your phone, opens with your watch. So you can decide who can get in and out. You don't have to worry about keys. Cameras, we replaced cameras a long time ago. I remember I used to have really cool digital cameras. I lived in the Caribbean for a few years and I invested in one of those long lens fancy cameras. No idea how to use it. I just had a fancy looking long lens camera and I pressed click. And I had sometimes amazing photos, sometimes blurry photos. I had no idea what I was doing. Now I have so many lenses and things going on my phone. It does all this stuff for me with software and everything else. And you look at your fitness trackers. I go for a run every morning. I listen to my podcast on Spotify. I track myself on Strava. I can get my messages all on this device. When I want to stop for a coffee on the way home, I just tap. So why do I bring this up? Why do I talk about how the phone displaced all those businesses? If you were in if you're Garmin making watches 10 years ago, if you're today in the business of making locks, you see your business as making locks. That's what I'm doing. And you look at your competitors and think, well, who else is out there making locks? You're not really expecting Apple to come along. Because what Apple did is they looked at what people need. They need access in and out of a building or out of a door. They need to be able to pay for something and track, this is my payment, my bank account, pay somebody else. They went beyond what the service they were offering that day was. They didn't just think about, well, we offer this service. They thought about wider services, and they displaced a lot of these different areas. And that's what I think is happening today in talent acquisition. Talent acquisition or recruiting is focused on one thing. And as the Americans use the phrase talent acquisition, it's acquiring talent. A lot of recruiters are very specialists at just that. They are garden watches, they are locks, they are wallets, they are cameras. They do a specific thing extremely well. And don't get me wrong, all of those industries still exist. They're just much smaller, or they're shrinking. Specialist cameras still exist. People will still want locks. People will still buy wallets, but that is not the mainstream solution anymore. And I'll explain that a little bit as we go along. What's happening today? Massive inflation rates around the world. I don't need to tell everyone here about the crazy, crazy levels of inflation. But we had this weird time where the US, Czech Republic, Ireland, all over the world, we have crazy inflation. But we also still have really low unemployment. Now it's changed slightly. But we're in this unique time where inflation is soaring. We're heading into a recession. Yet in most markets, Czech Republic today, we have, according to figures released in August, 312,000 job vacancies and 250,000 people unemployed. So more vacancies than there are people unemployed. In the US, it's a ratio of 2 to 1. Most of Europe, it's 1.5 to 2 to 1. The ratio of the amount of jobs open versus people available. So despite the fact that we're now in a recession, we have soaring inflation, we still have really, really, really low unemployment levels. And this is unusual. I'm using US data here because it's the easiest to get. It's very hard to get data across Europe. Every country does their own thing in Europe, unfortunately. But if I look at the unemployment rate, I look at inflation rates. Inflation usually, in normal times going back 100 years, inflation goes up, unemployment goes up, all right? Usually, in fact, one precedes the other, and it happens quite fast. This is an extremely unusual time we have in the world today, where inflation has gone way up, unemployment has not followed at the same pace. It may, it is already inching up slightly, but nowhere near the numbers you would expect it to, going back 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, when it always rises in step with inflation. So it is an unusual time. And you see this reported all over the world, where vacancies are really high, and we see it every day when we go to a cafe, a restaurant, a store, we go online, or we try and hire staff for ourselves. It is still extremely difficult to find talent in nearly every skill. I, like Jose, host a podcast every week, and a few months ago, I had a good friend of mine, Kevin Green, join me. Kevin is the Chief People Officer of an organization in the UK called First Bus. They employ 40,000 people, and they're the largest private bus company in the UK, and they own Greyhound Bus in the US, for example, and other businesses. And they hire folks who are frontline bus drivers. They hire technical engineers to manage the buses. By the way, they're high-end engineers because they're moving to electric buses. And they hire corporate staff in head office. And in all three areas, they struggle to hire talent. And he shared with me because previous to this role, he was the head of the Recruitment and Employment Confederation in the UK for 10 years. That's how I got to know him. That's the government, or the body that represents the recruitment community to the UK government. And when he started in that role 15 years ago, there were 3 skills that were identified in the UK that were in chronic short supply. There wasn't enough talent. Today, that number is something like 220. So there are professions and skills that, yes, it may be difficult to hire for, but there was enough people in the jobs. There was only 3 skills where there weren't enough people available in the market to fulfill the need. Today in the UK alone, that's 220. So it's a very different environment that we live in today than even 15 years ago. You have Accor Group. I don't know if anyone knows Accor Group, hotel chain. French-based, you might know some of their brands like Ibis, many different brands around the world. They're the largest hotel chain by number of employees. and they brought in a new CEO this year. And over the summer, he confided that the Accor group in many of their hotel chains are having to leave the top floors of their hotels empty, despite the fact that they have record demand. People coming back and traveling over the summer, the pandemic subsiding, people want to travel again, hotel prices are crazy at the moment. Accor group have to leave whole hotel floors empty. Why? Cannot find staff. They have to stop serving lunch, no lunch service in a lot of their hotels. They have to finish breakfast earlier than they want to because they cannot get staff. All right? So this is a real crisis in not just high-end engineers or software developers. This is everywhere in all aspects of the economy. So we know this is a challenge. So what I want to share with you is a little view of how recruiters are solving these challenges today. These are challenges we all have, most businesses have today. And as we talk about the future, I think it's good to look at what are people really doing today. And maybe they're not doing it everywhere. I want to give you an insight in terms of some of the creative ways that I'm seeing recruiting teams solve these problems. I'm going to walk you through these five. These are the five that I see happening more and more, and I think are really interesting ways that recruiters and teams are solving problems. One, making hiring everyone's job in the organization. Number two, pushing for more flexibility. Three, looking inside their organizations. Four, creating talent pools. And five, accessing untapped talent pools. Let me explain them. One, simple concept. How do you make hiring everybody's job? Because for a lot of organizations, hiring is something the recruiters have to fix. Yeah? Go get me 3 salespeople. Go get me 2 new engineers, whatever that might be. Okay? Like we are some magic pixies who can just create people out of nowhere. There you go. I'll exit stage left, and there's the wonderful talent you asked for. I found them in my back pocket, right? That's not working and has never really worked, although it's been the expectation in many organizations. Hiring is a team sport. From a candidate's perspective, it is not good enough to have an excellent recruiter. I spent my earlier career training recruiters how to be great recruiters. Jose in the Recruitment Academy, they can train recruiters to be amazing. But here's the challenge. A candidate comes into an interview, she's had a great experience with this fantastically well-trained recruiter. Then she walks up and she meets the hiring manager. The hiring manager's all, so tell me, why should we hire you? And she's like, you call me, you chased me, you sent me the LinkedIn messages, you sold me the company and persuaded me to come to this interview. I don't know why I want to work for you. Or the hiring manager says something stupid about their background or some comment that's just not very politically correct. We are only as strong as the weakest link in the hiring process. And if you've got great recruiters, but a weak hiring manager, a weak HR colleague, it all falls down because misalignment is the root of all evil. We see this when we go on to places like Glassdoor, where you see the comments, hiring manager was unprofessional, disturbing interviewer was an hour late, rude attitude. You can literally go into your own organizations. It's a really good exercise to try and diagnose, do we have any problems and where those problems are. And I find it in every client of ours. You find challenges and you find that it's not just, well, the recruiter wasn't great. In fact, it's rarely the recruiter wasn't good. You find it's somebody in the process. You realize you have to align everybody to make it work. We started working with Cisco a few years ago to try and fix this with them. And they were looking at how do we basically fix this? Because for them to align folks, the place to start was the interview, right? There's many ways to align a whole organization around this. But the starting point for a lot of organizations is just don't get sued, right? Please try and help our hiring managers to stop saying stupid shit, right? That's often where it starts, right? Like it's obvious for most of us that you shouldn't ask somebody's nationality. In most markets, that's illegal. It's biased. You should, it's not relevant. Do you have the right to work in this market? Is all you can really ask. But is it okay to ask somebody what their favorite book is? What do you think?
Yes.
Ask me what my favorite book is.
What's your favorite book?
The Quran. Where do you go with that? Or the Bible, or you just don't know what kind of answer you might get. Whereas an innocent question like that might seem, that's fine. Well, two things. Why do you need to know my favorite book? How does that relate to a job? Hiring managers can ask these things. And most times I may answer with a perfectly good answer, and we have a conversation, it's fine. But I might introduce a bias unexpectedly, and you don't know what to do with that. And that's going to shape the entire interview. So teaching all of the colleagues involved in interviewing what is not just the legal thing to say, but what's appropriate to say is important. But structured interviews better predict success. If you have a clear structure, we talk about the big four. When you're interviewing, you're trying to assess skills, motivation, values, and achievements. And ideally, you've aligned across your hiring team, and each person involved in the hiring process is assigned a different responsibility. Somebody's interviewing for values, somebody's focusing on skills, maybe somebody else on motivation, etc. And we have great alignment, and we have an understanding about the type of questions that work well to uncover the best answers. We also align on what a best answer looks like. It's quite clear, we have a rubric to understand that, and we can assess talent fairly across the organization. But great interviewers also attract great talent. If you come to an employer and it's too easy, what does that say about the potential colleagues I'll work with? It says that anybody can get in here. Where if it's a genuinely challenging interview, and I don't mean you're asking crazy questions like, how do you get 15,000 balls in this big ball, or stupid questions like that, right? It's challenging questions related to the work that I will do. If there's a high bar there, I want to work in this organization because good people must work here if it's difficult to get in. So doing this, we worked with Cisco to train 27,000 interviewers on best practice across 3 different levels. Basic, don't mess up. Then higher level, how do you do really good interviews? And then 3, how do you design a really good interview program for senior managers, managers of managers, people who do high volume interviewing. That scale is really important to drive a better hiring experience. Flexibility, big theme. Who likes working from home? I do. I enjoy it. Really enjoy working from home. Do not miss the office, all right, at all. We moved to a remote first environment in SocialTalent. Just a quick show of hands. Who here in their organization have some level of flexibility about where you can work in their businesses today? Who has, keep your hand up if you have full flexibility. People can work remotely whenever they want. It's really good. It's interesting. Love it. If I ask this in a group of Irish employers, by the way, I get very low numbers of hands. International companies, no problem. Unfortunately, I find Irish companies still struggle with this. Flexibility is interesting. I'm going to give you some examples. They're going to be US examples, but hopefully they work with you. We surveyed 500 HR and TA leaders, and 69% said flexibility and work-life balance accounted for the most of what keeps employees engaged. So it's a big, big theme with all employees at the moment. We know this. But I want to think, it's easy to think about the tech companies, and those of you who are tech companies and flexibility, it's obvious. Well, flexibility in a manufacturing environment might seem difficult, it might seem not appropriate. So I wanted to share a story of a manufacturer in the US in Kentucky. Cooper Standard make automotive parts for Ford and other car manufacturers. And they have 365 employees in their plant in Kentucky. It's very difficult to bring flexibility into a manufacturing environment. But they were struggling to find talent, as most manufacturers are across the world. They looked at their starting pay at $17 an hour, top pay $24. It's reasonable. They made sure they were at market rate. But they wanted to basically try and attract and retain better than they were doing. And so what they did is they brought in flexibility by introducing a 4-day working week. That was taking 5-day week and lengthening the day for 4 days. So still paying people the same amount, still getting the same amount of hours, but the 4-day working week allowed a huge number of their employees who were single parents to reduce their childcare costs by 1 day and spend time with their family. And when they rolled this out, a huge number of people opted to move from a 5-day to a 4-day. And the 4-day reduced their costs and gave them more money in their pockets and gave them more time with their family. This has been a massive success. It's improved retention in the factory, and it's allowed them to hire a new pool of talent because other manufacturers weren't doing the same thing. So when we think about flexibility and work from home, it might not be always in the traditional sense that some of you in a professional office setting think of. Flexibility can be brought in lots of different ways. I want to talk about another way that flexibility has come in. Has anyone heard about this chain in the US called Freshie? Do you have Freshie here in Czech Republic? We don't have them in Ireland. They're in different places in the world. So Freshie is a fast food chain where you get salads and healthy food. And in Canada, like most markets, when the pandemic subsided and they reopened their stores, Freshie could not hire people. It couldn't get any staff to work in hospitality. Like most markets, people had left hospitality, didn't want to go back to it, didn't want to be customer facing, and they really struggled to find talent. They were paying $15 an hour. It's kind of the minimum wage for somebody in Canada for a job like this. And to solve it, they went to a new company called Percy. And Percy provides a piece of hardware that sits on the counter that has a cashier on the video. And so when you walk into a Freshie, you walk up to the cashier, someone's there going, "Hi, how can I help you? How can I get a salad, please, with blah, blah, blah?" "No problem at all. Would you like peanuts with that?" "Yes, no problem." "Would you like mayo?" "Yes, thank you very much. That's $5. Do you want to pay card or cash?" "Card." "Tap over there, no problem." "Would you like a glass of water with that?" "Yeah, no problem, we'll get that for you. Your order will be ready in 2 minutes." That person who served them on the screen was in Nicaragua, Pakistan, or Bolivia. And for example, in Nicaragua, they paid these folks $3.75 per hour. They rolled this out at the beginning of this year, and the Toronto Star broke the story on the newspapers in Toronto as that this is disgraceful. They're taking Canadian jobs and outsourcing them. And then it was uncovered by another newspaper that the Toronto Star, all of their customer service was outsourced to India. So if you wrote in the Toronto Star to complain, somebody in India answered your call and dealt with your subscriptions. So they were using outsourcing. But outsourcing hasn't been used up to now in food and beverage. But Freshie, since this broke in April, are now expanding like crazy all across the US and Canada. And for example, they can pay an equivalent worker in India 35 cents Canadian dollars, 35 cents an hour, or the Philippines $1.65 to serve Americans and Canadians food. Now the person in Freshie is still making the food. They still have people behind the counter who prepare all the salads. But rather than having it completely automated in a machine, they recognize that people still want the human experience, but they don't want to pay $15 an hour. In fact, that wasn't even the motivation. They cannot find anyone at $15 an hour. So again, flexibility can be somebody working in a call center or from home somewhere in the world serving somebody in Toronto a sandwich or a bowl of salad. Looking inside, if you remember the start of the pandemic, for many of us, we had hiring freezes. We weren't allowed to hire externally. And I started talking to a lot of recruiting teams who were instead being asked to solve the challenge because we still had challenges. We still had parts of the business who had critical roles to fill. We had a hiring freeze. And so the recruiters were told, well, why don't we just look internally? Because we can still move people around, even though we can't hire externally. This was back in spring and summer 2020. And so this has begun a real acceleration of internal mobility driven by the recruiting teams. Because internal mobility has always been there. Internal jobs, internal advertisements. Yeah, we post our jobs, people move around, it's fine. But the pandemic brought this responsibility to the recruiting team for the first time. Proper professional recruiters doing it the right way. And I found in a lot of teams around the world, they haven't looked back since. Internal mobility is a no-brainer, all right? Typically, unfortunately, only about a third of candidates who sought a new job in the last 12 months looked inside their own organizations. But internal talent is less expensive. On average, if you appoint somebody internally to a post, it would take 4 years for that person to work up to the salary that you would have paid an external candidate for the same role. 4 years. The attrition level of internal candidates is half that of external candidates, and the time to productivity is 4 times faster to get them ramped up. Right? It's a no-brainer to do as much internal hiring as possible, but people don't do it, okay? Only 11% of companies promote a culture of internal mobility. We've seen organizations like HelloFresh. You folks know HelloFresh? HelloFresh are one of the biggest food delivery businesses in the world, okay? We don't have them in Ireland yet either. They're huge in the US, huge in Germany, France, Australia. We're actually a German company. Most people think they're an American company because they're so big in the US, but they're German. And HelloFresh, a friend of mine, Yasser Ahmed, went in there as the VP of Talent last summer, and he changed the rules. He said, we are going to allow our recruiting team to headhunt internally. So their recruiting team, when they have a rec open, they can go into the company directory. They actually use LinkedIn to search their own employees. And they can find somebody in some part of HelloFresh. They can call them up and say, I want you to apply for a vacancy. And this is all confidential until the person accepts the job, and then their manager is told your employee is leaving. Right? So they headhunt internally and produce shortlists that have combined external and internal candidates. And they look to support internal talent with better training, upskilling. They've learned how to sell those candidates internally. That's the extreme case. A lot of organizations, you're not allowed to poach internal talent. If you do have an internal applicant, you have to tell their boss. Their boss has to approve their application. All these restrictions remain in many, many companies, but they are being broken down very fast as organizations look to try and leverage more internal talent. But internal hiring is a little bit different to external hiring. External hires typically have the same job title, but they work for a competitor. So it's easy enough to explain to a hiring manager why she should hire this talent. When you're presenting an internal talent, often you're looking at their skills and not their experience. So it's more strengths-based or skills-based. And you have to try and convince the hiring manager why these skills can do that job, even though they may not have direct experience in the actual role before. So pitching into an internal candidate is a little bit different. So the skills needed are a little bit different. Cisco as well, I mentioned before, they have a one company, many careers approach. Their former VP of talent acquisition, Kelly, she brought this in 2 years ago. And since then, she's been promoted to the chief people officer. So now she's in charge of everything. She's driven these transformative changes. Uber, again, has a program where they call this gig project. They have a marketplace where folks can find not brand new jobs, but you can find projects to work on in Uber. And what that allows you to do is gain some experience and also build relationships across the business with other departments that you could eventually go work in. And this was to counteract a challenge that Uber found, which was that their organization, the head of Uber Eats, for example, he only knew people in the Uber Eats organization and never knew talent in other parts of the organization. This opens up opportunities for people to do a project for a few months, 20% of their time, 10% of their time. That allows them to work with different people in a different department, gain some skills, and gain a network. So begin to show that they could work in a different department, which is a really, really strong thing to help with internal mobility. So rather than saying, I know she's never worked in marketing before, but the recruiter can say, well, she worked on this marketing project for the last 3 months, and this is how she succeeded. This was the report from her manager, did really well, and she gained these skills. So even though she's never worked full-time, we have some examples. So those kind of gig projects can be really, really helpful as well. The fourth area is creating talent, right? A lot of organizations look to become talent creators. We hosted a live webinar for talent leaders last Thursday, and we had people from Avanade. Avanade is a joint venture between Microsoft and Accenture some years ago. Currently employ about 40,000 people, professional services business. And their TA team's strategy that they developed in 2020 was to become talent creators, because they recognized the skills they were hiring for, there just wasn't enough people in the market to fill all the jobs they will continue to have in the future years. So they decided strategically to become a talent creation team. What does that mean? I'll give you some examples. There's been a growth in something called eduployment in the last few years. Remember Jose talking to me a few years ago about some examples that he'd come across. And since then, I've looked into loads more businesses that are doing this. So Walmart, for example, Walmart in the US, Walmart are the biggest employer in the world. or no, Amazon still don't employ as many people as Walmart, millions of people. And when you when you go to Walmart's career site, they require you to have a high school diploma to work in many of their jobs. And a lot of people in the US don't have high school diplomas. They worked with a partner called Guild, a technology platform. And when you go to their career site, if you don't have a high school diploma, you can register online to get a high school diploma with Walmart for free. So then you can come back when you complete it and apply for one of their jobs. You don't have to apply for one of their jobs. You can get your high school diploma online and go work somewhere else. But this is working to create talent for Walmart. So rather than saying there aren't enough people with our requirements, is that let's create more people with our requirements. Let's give them the skills and education. Walmart also have 52,000 employees on a program to get free college education. 52,000 people that they pay to go to college online so they can build the skills so they can get promoted in Walmart for new jobs. Disney have a similar program they call Aspire, which offers again 100% paid tuition to leading US college courses. Amazon in the UK created 1,500 apprenticeships this year to try and create talent to be able to work in the business. Starbucks offer this, Target, tons of organizations doing this. Not just satisfied with what's in the labor pool, but creating whole labor pools by training the talent from scratch so they can have their own, they can increase the wider talent pool for everybody. But hopefully because they were involved in giving people the skills, some of those people will come work for them. The last, and one of the things I think is really interesting and excites me the most, is accessing untapped talent pools, of which there are many. The obvious one are women in the workplace. Different parts of the world, the pandemic had different effects on women in the workplace. In the US, it's calculated that about 600,000 women that were in the workplace before the pandemic have still not returned to the US workplace. In Ireland, it's a different story. Female participation in the workplace was about 67% in 2019. In Ireland, it's risen to 72%, almost exclusively because of remote work opportunities. More women are in the workplace today, where I come from, than were in the workplace pre-pandemic, because the opportunities are different. There's more flexibility there for women who typically are the primary caregiver in many households, unfortunately still in Ireland. That's not the case in the US or Canada. So it's different in different parts of the market, but leveraging returners and their different needs. Again, the need of a primary caregiver in a family is different to someone who's not the primary caregiver. So it's thinking about how you can accommodate different ways of working for different people in the organization and putting a real focus on that. A lot of the tech companies do this in the US. They have returner programs for parents who've been out of the workforce for several years because they've been a primary caregiver to their children or their parents. And they have programs to re-educate them and reskill them to get back to work. Similar to the Walmart or Disney examples, but they're maybe at higher levels of skills, teaching them new coding skills or management skills. Again, with no obligation to come work for them, but just giving the skills back and the confidence back to people who are looking to return to the market. And in turn, hoping that they would potentially work for that employer as well. So a lot of organizations having a lot of success with that. Disabilities. 1 in 4 of us in the workplace will have a disability during our life. 1 in 4. So when you think about the colleagues around you, or you look around the room today, it is likely that either 1 in 4 of us has a disability here today or will have a disability. The challenge with this is that disabilities aren't always visible. The international symbol for disability is what? You see stickers with the symbol for disabled or disability, it's what? It's a wheelchair. That causes problems because we think of disabilities as physical disabilities, you think of a wheelchair, okay? A lot of colleagues are more neurodiverse, folks who have challenges that you cannot see, invisible disabilities, that perhaps just require different accommodations. And only something like 20% of people who are neurodiverse will actually disclose this to an employer or to their colleagues. That means they're always holding something back because they're afraid of what it would mean. Will people think of them differently? Will they not get promotions, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is a real challenge. People with disabilities are 5 times more likely to be unemployed, right? The unemployment rates are much higher, depression rates are much higher. because organizations haven't taken the time to think about how you would accommodate different people from different backgrounds with different needs to be engaged in the workforce. And you have fantastic outcomes. Somebody who is perhaps ADHD, has ADHD, somebody who's on the spectrum. You can have folks with food disorders or bowel disorders. We have a colleague who shared with me after he joined SocialTalent that he has a bowel disorder that in his previous job meant that it was very difficult for him to work in an office. Very difficult. He challenges and he chronic pain that caused him to ring in sick. And he'd gone through 2 employers without telling them. And then they thought he was a guy who just was always sick, not engaged, lazy. But now he works for us, he works completely remotely. And he is in an environment where he feels he can share this. When he's at home, he doesn't have the same anxiety about access to bathrooms, etc. And now he can do his job. And his illness has resided. It's not as bad as it was. He doesn't have the same number of episodes and repeats of the problems he had because he's more relaxed, less stressed, gets to work at home. Again, I would never have thought that was a challenge. I would have thought this would be a challenge that somebody with his condition would be held back from giving their whole in the workplace. It's amazing when you don't have empathy for people because you just don't understand their perspective, how your workplace maybe isn't very accommodating. But you can be much more accommodating quite easily. You look at Microsoft, we're in the room here today, as a neurodiversity hiring initiative focused on data science, software engineering, consulting. We have lots of clients who would tap into the disability community for hiring. But it's something you don't do lightly. You have to really engage with those communities, understand their needs, and then find the right parts of your business or the right ways of working to attract more talent. But considering 1 in 4 have a disability or will have a disability, it's an enormous population to tap into. Another area, big in the US, probably more because they have the highest incarceration rate in the world, is tapping into individuals who are formerly incarcerated. In the US, a lot of employers, if you have a criminal record, you can't get a job. I want to think about your own. Does anyone here, do you know if your own application process asks people if they have a criminal record? Anyone do that? One hand. So a lot of organizations still ask this. Sometimes we just have it in our application process and we don't really remember why it's there. A lot of organizations are rethinking this, right? Incarceration rates crazy. Ben & Jerry's launched a new scheme in their franchise stores to hire folks who are formerly incarcerated. JP Morgan Chase Financial Services, last year, 10% of all new hires had a criminal record. Might be surprising in banking. Again, they're trying to tap into a market they were underserving. I looked at a manufacturing company in Cincinnati called Nehemiah Manufacturing. 80% of their workforce are what they call second chance hires, people who are formerly incarcerated. And attrition is 5 times less than other manufacturing employers. And they're part of a US organization called Beacon of Hope Business Alliance that work with organizations to teach them how do we better accommodate people who are formerly incarcerated. What are their needs? Where do we find them? How do we engage with those communities? So again, looking at untapped workforces, where there's huge potential, much more loyalty, high productivity, and it's not just a thing you're taking a risk on anymore. It's being done on scale by so many employers who've tested it and proven these aren't people who are going to steal your stock or, defraud your business. Certainly not at any rate higher than everybody else in your organization. In fact, there are much more benefits around loyalty, lower attrition, higher productivity as well in these populations. And last but not least, obviously a big thing for us in Europe, the hiring of refugees. So 75% of all refugees come from just 6 countries: Ukraine, Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Sudan, and Myanmar. And there's a lot of organizations working hard to try and tap into the refugee community, or in the US, the communities of people for whom English is a second language. GE Appliances, which is actually a Chinese company in the US, started a program in February and hired 40 refugees from Afghanistan in that program. The beauty about this is that the day a refugee gets a job is the day she stops being a refugee. So not only are the benefits to an employer of being able to fill roles that you can't fill, you have lower attrition level. Average turnover rate for refugees at manufacturing companies is 4%, below the average of 11% for all employees. you actually get to really impact someone's life in an amazingly positive way. Again, it requires recruiters with the language skills and understanding of the community you're hiring from and the stresses they've gone through, different ways of hiring and assessing those skills. So it does require change in your recruiting patterns and ways, but amazing outcomes. Pfizer has launched another similar initiative around hiring refugees, and Chobani, the manufacturer in the US, has done the same thing in Idaho and upstate New York. So really, in summary, when I talk about the future of recruiting, the future of recruiting is to think less about recruiting, okay? To me, when you look at what has been called the talent acquisition partner, which is what a lot of us call our recruiters, the modern talent acquisition partner, she's a talent development partner. She's also the talent mobility partner. She's the talent outsourcing partner. She's the talent automation partner. She's the talent partner. This is very much what I've seen in the trend in recruiting, is that the organizations that we serve no longer want a one-trick pony. They don't want somebody who just understands acquisition, because the solution is no longer just about acquiring talent. The solution, perhaps more complicated, it might involve retraining or upskilling my existing workforce. It may involve some outsourcing. It may involve automation. It may involve an L&D initiative. And yes, it may involve hiring. But it's really about trying to think more holistically about talent, because that is not just the future, is the present for some of the more advanced talent acquisition teams. They are thinking bigger about how they solve the problems and moving just beyond talent. You gotta ask yourselves, do you want to be the wallet or do you want to be the iPhone? Thank you. We have time? It's okay. We have a minute or two. If anyone has any questions or any comments or thoughts? I don't bite. You can put your hand up and be brave, it's no problem.
Go ahead and ask when the last time you had a chance to ask Johnny anything in person, right? So, anyone interested in anything? And the same
maybe
goes.
me. What about disabilities? Do you think about also mental illnesses or something like that?
Yeah, and again, mental illnesses, there's a broad spectrum of what that might be, from depression, high anxiety, to neurological disorders. Yes, so we work with a good friend of mine, Nick Maley, runs talent acquisition at Equinix, and they're the largest owners of data centers around the world. So they own more data center properties and they lease data centers to different companies. And Nick's team have moved most of their hiring to try and hire from different pockets, such as folks with disabilities. And Nick has a young son who's on the spectrum with autism, and so he had a personal interest in helping different communities. So they started working with 4 or 5 different groups who were engaged in the disability market. So their recruiters didn't just go out there saying, let's try and figure out how to hire people with disabilities. They engaged with communities who worked with folks with different disabilities. And they asked them, what are their needs? What are the different types of people who might be available? What work might be best suited for them? And they really worked to understand that need and then work with them to try and attract that talent and find that talent. So this isn't like putting an ad on LinkedIn saying we're open to somebody with disabilities. It's more working with community groups who represent people with disabilities. And some of that worked and some of it didn't work. But overall, it worked, and they learned more about each community. They were able to adapt. And he shared an insight with me that it's really important to understand what's the right work for a certain individual based on their background or their ability or disability. And that not every type of job is going to be right for them. And really understanding that matching within the organization, which requires a deep understanding of the community you're working with. And Nick's team said that they worked on one group at a time. So they didn't just say, let's do refugees, disabilities, women, LGBTQ, all at the same time. They worked one at a time. They picked an area, they went deep on it, they worked with several groups, learned to understand it. When they had kind of really got traction with that and was working, then they move on to a different area. So I think it's one at a time, but engaging with different community groups who understand that community of people is what's really important. And getting the recruiters to work with those folks to understand what are the needs, what are the potentials, what's the experience of those community groups with, what skills might these people be best suited for. Every type of role, right? But it's just understanding based on each different, maybe neurological disorder or ability or disability, what might be the best route for that person. problem. There's, if you want, we have a podcast called The Shortlist, and Nick Maley did this interview about 5 weeks ago, and he shares a big insight in terms of how his organization worked with untapped communities. It's a 45-minute interview. I say very little, so it's good. And Nick shares a lot about what their team has done, and you can learn a lot from that on Spotify if you want. No problem.
One question. So you mentioned at Cisco you have retrained around 57,000 people.
27,000, yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like how have you done that, and what were the biggest challenges in doing that?
So those 27,000 people completed online learning on our platform. That's the easy bit, right? We have tons of learning, really focused, really high quality, gets great feedback. John Vasavica mentioned the Bar Raiser program, and Amazon is the main trainer, delivers that. It's really engaging. But it worked because Cisco did it really well. So their culture, more American culture, they brought in, if you opened a rec, to open a rec on their ATS, you had to complete 1 hour training program. You couldn't open a rec without that. So it wasn't mandatory training, it was mandatory to hire. So they rolled it in phases, introduced it in Europe first, different parts of Europe, Asia, different parts of the US, and over a year eventually hit 27,000 people. They had an 85% completion rate of that training, and an NPS of 90. They really loved it. But they had 1 hour program, a 2 hour program, and a 3 hour program. So the minimum was the 1 hour, and some people did the 2 and the 3 hour. So they just incentivized people, and then they kind of sold it internally by saying, this is brilliant, and we're getting better outcomes and better hires for this. But it was more of a stick that you had to do it to open the rec. So we synced our system with their ATS. So every 24 hours we push who completed a certificate. So their system could see that this hiring manager hasn't completed her training and can't open a rec. And then she completed it, and then the rec would open. So a technical way of doing it. Booking.com in Europe, different. We've got 3,000 people going through training with Booking.com, but it's voluntary. So that's more of a sales strategy. So we're marketing that. We're launching it in pockets. We're getting people to tell the story of how it's helped them hire better talent. We're marketing that to the leaders. And we're going to the top department heads and getting them to get their buy-in and sell it to their teams. Because their culture isn't one that they would introduce a compulsory training. So the culture is very important. The tool is the same. There's other tools I'm sure that can be used, but it's more how you roll this out. But you can, we did this in IBM at 90,000 hiring managers. Avanade, 8,000 people last year. So you can get scale training. And then we have recertification programs every 18 months. So the hiring manager has to show she still has that knowledge and complete assessments every 18 months. So, but it's really the project management internally that makes it work. I'm going to pause there. We're going to do a panel later on. I'm sure we have more opportunity for conversation, but I'll hand over to the team. Thanks, folks.